For it has to be remembered that the ancient Romans, if not worldwide, very normally were indifferent to homo and heterosexual. There may be an element of religious propaganda to this image of Rome too. The Catholic Church took hold in the last centuries of the empire. It was in the Church's interests to portray the pre-Christian, pagan Roman world as one of out-of-control desires, orgies and endemic rape that they had brought under control. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe, like and share. The Romans had an abiding set of moral rules called the mos maiorum, thus, the way of the elders, a largely accepted and unwritten code of good conduct. These customs did consider sexual excess outside the bounds of ideal behavior defined by Virtus, an ideal state of masculinity that included self-control. Women too were expected to be chaste, pudicitia. The written laws also included sexual offenses, including rape, which could carry a death sentence. Prostitutes were not given this legal protection, and the rape of a slave would only be considered a crime of property damage against the slave's owner. When it comes to marriage, it was, in reality, a lopsided affair. Women who married were not expected to attain any pleasure from it. They simply wedded in order to abide by the moral code and procreate. Moreover, the subservient wife was expected to turn a blind eye to her husband's sexual infidelity. Males were allowed to sleep around as much as they liked so long as their mistress was unmarried, or, if they were with a boy, he was over a certain age. Brothels, prostitutes and strippers were all considered to be fair game, as were older males, on the condition that he was to be submissive. Being passive was considered women's work. Men who submitted were considered deficient in vir and in virtus, they were denounced and reviled as unmanly. An example of this moral code was seen with Julius Caesar's long and public affair with Cleopatra. Due to the fact that Cleopatra was not with a Roman citizen, Caesar's actions were not considered adulterous. The Romans were, in many ways, more sexually liberated than we are. There was a strong sexual element in much of Roman religion. The Vestal virgins were celibate in order to keep them independent of male control, but other religious ceremonies celebrated prostitution. Moreover, divorce and other such legal proceedings were as easy for women to undertake as men. In this sense, women were, in many cases, more sexually liberated than they are in many nations to this day. To talk of homosexuality, it was considered unremarkable, certainly among men. In fact, there were no Latin words to differentiate between same-sex and different sex desire. Children were protected from sexual activity, but only if they were free-born Roman citizens. Prostitution was legal and endemic. Slaves were considered as much their master's property in sexual terms as they were economically. We can accurately measure the Romans' laissez-faire attitude toward sex because we know so much about their sex lives. A similar survey of British writing in the 19th century wouldn't provide nearly so clear a picture. The Romans wrote about sex in their literature, comedy, letters, speeches and poetry. There seems to have been no low-culture taboo attached to writing, or depicting, sex frankly. The finest writers and artists were happy to partake. Hey, let me credit History Hit. More of the crucial information was gotten from their humble history site. Check them out to get more. Roman art is filled with images that would today be regarded as pornographic. In Pompeii, erotic mosaics, statues and frescoes that were used to represent these pieces are found not only in known brothels and bath houses which may have been places of business for prostitutes, but also in private residences, where they are given pride of place. There are erotically charged objects almost everywhere in the suffocated city. This was something that the Romans could cope with, but not modern Europeans. Many such discoveries were kept largely under lock and key in a Naples museum until 2005. The idea that no Roman day was complete without an orgy or two is largely formed from after-the-fact condemnations of bad emperors like Nero, the first emperor to commit suicide to escape his fate, and Caligula, the first emperor to be assassinated. From luring in unicorns to protecting the Roman Empire, myths have surrounded virginity for centuries. Most of the knowledge we have about sex in Roman culture is from the viewpoint of wealthier, upper-class citizens, since they were more likely to be literate, to have the time and inclination to write, and to have other people care enough to preserve their writings. The image we sometimes get from these accounts is that everyone was having sex with everything all the time right out in the streets. But there is historical evidence suggesting that many of the common people looked down on the sexual debauchery of the higher classes, and that the non-wealthy majority had far more reserved sexual practices. Which makes a kind of sense. If extramarital sex is reserved mostly for using those far below you in social status, then people at the bottom of the hierarchy would not have the same array of sexual outlets. Thank you for watching. Please, don't forget to subscribe, like and share.